Celts were highly superstitious. Details about their worship and religion are, however, mostly lost to us. Those that are not, are passed on by Roman authors who, despite providing valuable insight, were plagued by bias, limited and indirect information, as well as Romanizing Celtic deities. Archaeological remains and Roman reflections of the complex religious system of the Celts therefore provide a fertile ground for misinterpretation. It is also worth noting that Celtic religious system differed between different tribes and ethnicities of Latin culture that spread across Europe. In general, Celtic religion revolved around magical entities pervading nature and objects alike, while influencing every individual and determining their destinies. The records of these Celtic gods are many, with more than 200 names of deities being found across Europe. That is a very large number that would lead to a complicated pantheon if used generally across the Celtic world. But if one accepts that one deity could be known by different names across different tribes and regions, we can narrow their pantheon down to a far more manageable size. For many of these gods, parallels could be found with Roman and Greek deities. But even among Celtic tribes, similar characteristics don't necessarily mean the same divinity. Julius Caesar wrote about Gallic gods, but does not name them. Instead, he gives them a comparable tag from the Roman pantheon, like Mercury, Mars, Minerva, Apollo, and so on. Another author, Lucan, names Teutates, Tyrannes, and Isis as Celtic deities and ascribes a method of sacrificial worship to each. Among archaeological remains, other names rise up: Lugh, Maponos, Brigit, Ogmios, Cernunnos, Epona, and more. However, all these names and writings date to the Roman era, and could be consequently associated with a Roman counterpart. It is because of this Roman filter, which covers almost the entire pantheon and religion of Celts, that makes research about this topic so difficult. As Celts didn't leave us written records of their own, we have to rely on these Roman simplifications and Romanizing of deities. Celtic tradition of record-keeping and storytelling was an oral one instead of written. Celts in the heart of Europe didn't develop their own writing systems until much later, but some of their earliest items contain letters and words based on neighboring languages and scripts, like Venetic, Etruscan, or Greek. In most societies, communication between mortal and divine planes is interpreted and mediated by spiritual guides and specialists. In the Celtic world, these were the Druids. They belonged to the social elite, led rituals, and acted as judges in disputes and criminal cases. Druids didn't carry weapons and didn't always take part in battle. When they did, they sang incantations that inspired their warriors and demoralized opponents. The Druid class had the strongest presence in Gaul and British Isles, but spiritual and religious rituals were performed across different Celtic tribes of Europe. The Celts gave a great value to the moon and based their calendar on it, as well as depicting it on their weapons. As Celtic societies were heavily based on agriculture, understanding the changing of seasons and natural cycles was that much more important to the Celts. Julius Caesar notes that they compute the divisions of every season, not by the number of days, but of nights. Of ancient writers, Caesar and Tacitus share that especially the lives of Celtic warriors were full of rituals and so-called barbaric customs, spreading from worship to their appearance, like the rite of passage from boyhood to manhood, and offering of weapons in cult places. Headhunting was one such custom that characterized Celtic culture. The custom was probably based on the belief that a human head, particularly a warrior's, would contain their life force, which could then be harnessed by the new owner. That, and they probably found them to be good trophies, indulging their so-called boastful ego, as the Roman writers would call it. Like ancient Greece and Rome in their earliest years, Celts too were known to have practiced human sacrifice, accompanied with the offerings of plunder, goods, and artifacts. Polybius and Caesar also note offering of spoils to the gods. Especially interesting are also recounts of Livy, who describes how Celts during the sacking of Rome in the 387 BC seized and piled enemy weapons according to their customs, and how the tribe of Boy chanted while carrying the spoils of the Roman commander, and took his head to the holiest of sanctuaries. Celtic holy grounds and places of worship were located either within a settlement or at select natural landmarks. Some remained active all the way from the early Iron Age until the end of the Roman period. These places of unusual natural formations have fascinated human minds for centuries, and some sites continue to be natural marvels to this day. At places of worship, especially remote ones, archaeologists found many precious artifacts. These offerings were not always ritualistically destroyed, like equipment of warriors that was placed in their graves upon death. Instead, goods were either burned, deposited into a watery body, similar to the preceding cultures of the Bronze Age, or displayed, sometimes fastening them to wooden planks or trees, exposing them to the watching visitors and deities. Different places of worship were visited by different people and were presumably dedicated to different deities with their own dominion. Like fertility or warfare, concepts that are neither Celtic or Roman in origin, but are instead themes that spread among humans across cultures. The deposited items could be votive offerings, weapons to ensure success, or in gratitude for a successful return from battle. Farmers offered their tools for a good yield, masons would offer chisels, and so on. The funerary customs varied across regions, though it is unknown if this was bound with differences in ethnicity. The Celts predominantly burnt their dead on a pyre, together with their personal items. The remains were then placed either directly into a grave pit, or into a ceramic urn or other container, before the burial. Food and drink were placed into graves, and some even contained bones of farm animals like pigs and chickens, while the richest of them would contain an entire wild boar as an offering. Boars had a special meaning to the Celts and were often depicted with warriors and in religious context. Animals were ambassadors to the gods, their symbols and auguries. The Celts originally removed themselves from naturalistic and classical depictions of humans and animals alike, instead preferring their own abstract arts, especially through their characteristic art style of underlying arcs and circles. Graves of warriors were marked with weapons and other battle equipment, sometimes even war chariots. Implements for personal hygiene were also found, like scissors, razors and pincers. Battle equipment was intentionally damaged as part of a burial ritual, which indicates a belief that a weapon loses its power, purpose or significance upon the death of its owner. Just like with their weapons, the Celtic gods and rituals lost their power with the declining Celtic population. Only on the farthest fringes of Western Europe did their languages and beliefs persist to this day.